Welcome to the Endo Belly Girl podcast. I'm your host, Alyssa Chavez. I'm a nutritional therapy practitioner and restorative wellness practitioner on a mission to change the way that we support women with endometriosis. Endo is a full-body disease that impacts your mind, body, and spirit in countless ways that aren't often addressed the way that women truly deserve. We are here to talk about all of it. Please keep in mind that the content of this show has been created for educational purposes only and should never be used as a replacement for medical diagnosis or treatment. Hey, my friend, and welcome back to the Endo Belly Girl podcast. If you have endometriosis and you're still eating gluten, yes, even a little bit, you need to hear today's episode. In a 2012 study, 75% of endo warriors who cut out gluten saw a major drop in their pain. 75%. That's not a coincidence. And yet, so many people are out here still struggling, still inflamed, and still wondering why they feel terrible. Here's the deal. I'm Alyssa Chavez, a functional nutritionist who's helped hundreds of endo warriors reduce their symptoms, and I'm telling you, for the vast majority of people, gluten and endo are not friends. But before you roll your eyes and say, I don't have celiac, I don't need to do this, I need you to hear me out. By the end of this episode, you'll know exactly why gluten might be keeping you stuck in pain, wrecking your gut and your immune system, and you'll also understand the right way to go gluten-free so you can actually see results. And no, it's not about giving up every food that you love forever, but there's one key mistake that most people make when they try this, and I don't want you to waste months feeling worse because of it. So let's dive in. First off, let's get into our myths versus truths when it comes to gluten and endo. Myth number 1, gluten only affects people with celiac disease. The truth, even if you don't have celiac, gluten can still trigger inflammation, disrupt your gut, and worsen endo symptoms. Research shows that endo warriors who cut out gluten experience less pain. So why is that happening? I'll break that down in just a bit. Myth number 2, going mostly gluten-free is good enough. I hate to be the bearer of bad news here, but the truth is that even tiny amounts of gluten can keep your gut inflamed. If you're still having cheat days or eating just a little gluten, your body may be staying stuck in that cycle of inflammation. I'll explain why this happens and what to do instead so you can actually see results. Myth number 3, gluten-free alternatives are just as good for your health. The truth, a lot of gluten-free packaged goods are just as inflammatory as the real thing, and honestly, sometimes worse. So if you're swapping wheat bread for a gluten-free alternative but still feeling bloated and fatigued, there may be a reason for that. So I'll help you to understand how to go gluten-free the right way to actually feel better. Okay, so let's dig in. You all know, if you've been listening to this podcast for any length of time, that I love talking about your gut. So I'm in luck, and so are you, because I get to talk about that today. So let's talk about the connection between endo, your gut, and gluten and how all those pieces tie together. So first, let me take a step back and just remind you all that first and foremost, endo is an immune system dysfunction. And along with that, 70 to 80% of your immune system lives inside of your gut. And I think it's also important to note that upwards of 90% of women, that's 90 of women with endo, also report gut-related symptoms. I just don't feel like all of those things I just mentioned are a coincidence. So endo is first and foremost an immune system dysfunction. 70 to 80% of the immune system lives in your gut, and also upwards of 90% of women with endo also have gut-related symptoms. Okay, now let's take a look at how gluten impacts both your gut and your immune system, since those two pieces are so intimately connected with each other. First of all, and I know I've talked about this on previous episodes of the podcast, so I'm going to give you kind of a brief little overview today of leaky gut. Leaky gut is something that's really important when it comes to the health of your immune system. So basically what happens there, how that works, is that the lining of your intestines is only one cell thick. And that doesn't mean that there's only one cell blocking between the lining of your gut and, the rest of your body. That's the barrier that goes between the inside of your gut and the space where all the blood vessels and lymphatic system and all of that flows behind the scenes. That's how the nutrient absorption happens, right? The nutrients go through that single cell lining and they're able to then go into the bloodstream and the lymphatic system and be carried off to wherever they need to go. So here's where this becomes an issue. There are certain types of proteins, and gluten is definitely one of those that's a major factor here, especially when you have some digestive dysfunction going on and your body's maybe just not breaking food down really well. And that can really impact that lining of your gut because some of these large food particles, like gluten particles, can actually damage that single cell lining of your gut. And when that happens, now these large food particles can make their way through these damaged areas and straight towards where your immune system lives behind the scenes there. And that can start to cause immune system responses. That can start to cause your body to flag those types of proteins as foreign and unfamiliar. And it starts to become just this big snowball effect where your body starts to recognize these foreign invaders and mounts an immune response. And it just starts to become kind of this chronic picture, especially when you're eating those same foods day after day after day. And so it starts to just trigger that immune system activation, that chronic inflammation in your body. And that can also snowball into ending up having a nutrient malabsorption, especially if the actual cells of that lining of your gut are damaged. And that's a really big deal for endo warriors who already may struggle with nutrient deficiencies. That nutrient malabsorption piece is especially true if you do have celiac, which there is some crossover. I have multiple clients who I'm working with right now who actually have celiac as well as endometriosis. So it's very possible to have both. But I think the other important thing to note here is that your immune system, when it's reacting to these gluten proteins in your body, your immune system isn't just in that one part of your body. It doesn't just hang out in that one area and, only causes issues there. No, you have one immune system for your whole entire body, one system. And so when there's a reaction in your gut, that actually can snowball into an immune reaction basically happening in your entire body. And that's why pain and fatigue and all the things can show up in many different areas, right? Just because gluten that's coming into your gut might be the issue doesn't mean that that's where the pain is necessarily going to be. Sometimes pain can come up in so many different ways, right? It may be that pelvic pain. Some people will get joint pain. I mean, there's all kinds of different ways that it can manifest itself in your body. So that's where we have to be aware that you have that one immune system. And so you can see reactivity happening in other areas of your body, even when that initial reaction may be happening in your gut. So you're kind of starting to make the connections there, starting to see how it all pieces together, right? We maybe aren't digesting well. We're not breaking down our food well. And so we're consuming gluten. We have these large particles of gluten that haven't been broken down. They start to damage that lining of your gut. Now those large food particles are coming right into contact with the bloodstream, with the immune system back there. It starts to cause this immune response, which causes inflammation. And this can end up popping up pretty much anywhere in your body. So crazy how it's all connected, right? That's one thing I'm always so fascinated by. And honestly, we probably still have a lot to learn on that front. But that's the basic understanding of what we know today, at least, right? So immune system reactivity, like I was talking about, when we see that ends up leading to inflammation. That's what inflammation is. Inflammation is your immune system at work, right? And key symptoms that we typically see when it comes to inflammation are pain and fatigue. Are those common symptoms of endometriosis? Well, I think we all know the answer to that. So that's why eliminating certain foods like gluten is just very high on my list, although this can apply to other foods as well. But for today's episode, we're going to focus on gluten. But that's why eliminating foods like that can really affect your immune system can be such a key piece of healing, which is all what we all want and why it's so powerful for people. So I want to talk about that study that I mentioned earlier, but before I dive into that, I just wanted to share my own personal journey with this. And I realized we're now 80 episodes into the podcast, and I realized I actually never did a whole episode just on gluten and endo. So I thought, well, it's about dang time that we did that, because it was such a powerful thing for me early on in my journey. So I learned that I had endometriosis, and like so many of you, it took me a long time to get a diagnosis. Secondly, when I did get a diagnosis, I got very little information about endometriosis. I remember my husband was actually with me in the doctor's office when my doctor first mentioned it, and I was one of the, I suppose, fortunate people who they were able to see endometriosis on an ultrasound. That was how I initially received a diagnosis. And sure, it wasn't definitive until I had my surgery, which was about 2 years later, but they were, just based on what they were seeing on the ultrasound and, their own previous experience with this stuff, it was basically told me that that's most likely what's going on here. And I remember I was walking out of there and my husband looking at me like, oh my gosh, are you okay? He's thinking it's like something life-threatening. And so we went home and I'm just digging down the Google rabbit hole and starting to learn all the things. And, over time just was really struggling. I was trying to go the medication route and doing all the things and was just kind of hating life through all of that. And so I started to want to dig deeper into what I could do to support my own body. Like what can I do through diet and lifestyle kind of stuff to support myself as I'm working with these doctors? And so I discovered an article about gluten and endo and how so many women do better when they are gluten-free. And so I said, you know what, I'm just going to give it a whirl. My mom actually is gluten sensitive as well, and I am her daughter. So I figured it was maybe not unlikely that I had a similar thing going on. So I told myself I was going to give it 30 days, right? I had just finished a really painful period. I didn't want to have that happen again. And so I said, I'm going to give it 30 days and see where we are, see what happens. So I went completely gluten-free, just cold turkey, cut it out of my life, and, just completely avoided it during that time. And what happened? Well, those 30 days went by. I had my next period, and but it wasn't quite completely pain-free, but it sure was a significant reduction in my pain and that's the only change that I made during that time. That was it. I hadn't gone all in on the dietary changes, although that happened shortly after that. All I did was go gluten-free, and I absolutely had a reduction in pain, a very noticeable, very significant reduction. So I just had to share that from my own personal journey. Now, this takes me to the study that I mentioned earlier. There was a study done in 2012 where they had over 200 endo patients go gluten-free for 12 months. And the results of that were that 75% of those people ended up having a significant reduction in pain. So this is an actual clip from the study that I kind of copied and pasted here so that I could read it directly. The conclusion, it says, at the 12-month follow-up, 156 patients, which is 75% of the patients who participated in the study, reported statistically significant change in painful symptoms. 51% of patients, 25%, reported not improvement of symptoms, and no patients reported worsening of pain. A considerable increase of scores for all domains of physical functioning, general health perception, vitality, social functioning, and mental health was observed in all patients. So, that's pretty powerful. I mean, 75% is a pretty big number. And I'll circle back to at the end just the whole idea that while dietary changes and going gluten-free can be really powerful, it may not be the solution for everybody. It's not like it's one magical thing that will solve all of your problems. So for that 25% that did not have improvement of symptoms, it could well be that they just need more support in other areas. But I do think that's super powerful that 75% of those patients did see a significant change in painful symptoms. That's fantastic. So sure, is more research needed on this stuff? Probably, right? It's one of those things, right? Trying to actually get research done, especially on dietary stuff where there's, let's be real, just not a lot of money to be made on it. It can be challenging to get more research done, but the evidence that we're seeing is just too strong to ignore, in my humble opinion. So I just wanted to share that with you all. I think that's so important to know about. Okay, changing gears a little bit, we're going to chat a little about why going all in on being gluten-free is important, because this is a mistake that I see so many people make. I hear so many people who go gluten-free and then, but I'm just going to have a cheat day here and there. I'm going to eat a little bit of gluten. And some people may not feel direct symptoms from that. And if that's you, amazing. Everybody's a little bit different, but I will say that the vast majority of people who see a lot of improvement from going gluten-free, you really do have to be 100% gluten-free, right? Like just make the decision, I'm going to go gluten-free, I'm not going back. I did a little bit of experimenting with that myself. So I was gluten-free. I felt so good after those first 30 days that I kept it going. And after about 3 or 4 months, like anything, I was feeling a little stir crazy. I was missing some foods. And so I did a little challenge, a little experiment, and tried a little bit of gluten. And for me, it did not go well at all. I had a little bit of gluten and was in an immense amount of pain. I had like some severe stomach pain going on. It was very not a fun experience. Now, that's not going to be the case for everybody. I do understand that. But if you're really struggling with pain in general, pelvic pain, period pain, if you have a lot of gut symptoms, you have inflammation happening in your gut, you're feeling bloated, you have constipation, diarrhea, any of those fun, endo belly, hence the name of the podcast here, any of those symptoms going on, I really recommend just cutting the cord on gluten completely. I find that most people do so much better that way. So, I think I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but I think it's just important to know. Reason behind that is that very small amounts of gluten can actually still inflame and damage your gut. It can also take days for gluten to work its way out of your system. I hear people talk sometimes about, I got glutened right when I went out to a restaurant and felt just kind of fatigued and brain fog or whatever for days afterwards, or was bloated for days, whatever it was. So yeah, I mean, certainly pay attention to how your unique body reacts, because you guys know I'm all about bio-individuality. So, everybody's going to be a little bit different. I can't speak for Endo warriors as a whole. I'm just speaking from my clinical experience and my personal experience and, the minimal research that has been done on this stuff that is just showing a lot of evidence that going gluten-free is a good way to go. And also just your immune system needs a chance to calm down, especially if you hadn't been gluten-free before, you'd been eating all the things, and your immune system just can't fully calm down if it's continually under attack, so to speak, right? I have quotations going on, even though you can't see me over here. But if your immune system feels like it's constantly being threatened and it's having to, do this inflammatory response, that can really be an issue. You want to actually give your immune system a chance to calm down and settle down and just know that it's safe, right? We need to remind our bodies that they're safe. Okay, so we've talked about all the reasons that it's important to at least try a gluten-free diet and see how it goes in your body. But we can't leave here today without talking about how to go gluten-free in a way that will actually support your body. So first and foremost, I know I made this mistake early on, and I see so many people do this as well. What you don't want to do is just swap tons of processed gluten-containing foods for tons of processed gluten-free foods, right? Just being gluten-free does not make a food healthy. I remember there was a lot of excitement years ago now when Oreos came out with a gluten-free Oreo. Now, before you go running to the store to buy yourself some gluten-free Oreos, the reason I bring this up is because they have terrible ingredients, right? So the whole point of adopting a gluten-free diet is to help us to, reduce inflammation in your body and reduce the load on your immune system and all of that. And you're not going to reduce inflammation by eating a ton of gluten-free processed foods that are full of sugar and, vegetable oils, seed oils, all the things that we just don't want in our bodies, all the chemicals, all the additives, right? Instead, focus on getting real whole foods, at least for the most part, your protein and veggies and fruits and all the things, and maybe have some minimal healthier versions of gluten-free alternatives when you need them. Definitely be checking those nutrition labels. If you don't read the ingredients on everything that you buy, time to start. And it's okay to eat some stuff, right? I am a nutritionist myself, and I have gluten-free cookies in my pantry right now, and I feel okay about that. The goal here is not absolute perfection, and anybody who tells you that, I would really like to see how they're living. That's why I like to be really honest about what I do. I'm not perfect. I would say 99.999% perfect with the gluten-free thing. And honestly, when I'm not, it's not on purpose, right? If I end up consuming gluten, it's completely by accident, like I was out at a restaurant and didn't realize something had gluten. Those are usually the instances that I would have it. There's never really a time where I'm like, oh yeah, I think I'm just going to have that piece of bread today or that piece of cake, because I know that it doesn't make me feel good. But yes, I do use some of the gluten-free, packaged options. And yeah, it's all a balance, right? You want to be mostly focused on whole foods. Okay. Other things to be aware of when you're eating a gluten-free diet. You can eat naturally gluten-free grains, things like quinoa, rice, buckwheat. I know even though it has wheat in the name, buckwheat actually does not have wheat in it or gluten, if you tolerate those things well. Some people don't. So that's very individual as to whether that would work well for your body or not. But just know that there are grains that are gluten-free. Of course, you want to avoid the obvious when you're going gluten-free. Anything made with wheat flour, which you will quickly recognize how many things do have wheat flour in them. So that's going to be, bread, flour tortillas, crackers, cookies, cakes, pastries, all of that stuff that's made with wheat flour. But you also want to be aware of some of those things that you might not immediately think of. Things like soy sauce actually has wheat in it. So you'll want to look for alternatives like tamari sauce or coconut aminos are good alternatives. You want to look for sauces and gravies because flour is a common thickener in sauces. You want to also check things like salad dressings, seasonings, beer, and some other kinds of alcohol as well that have gluten in them. So those are some of the other things you might want to be aware of that you may not immediately think of. Okay. And then one more thing that I wanted to touch on today was just we talked about how gluten can be damaging to your gut. And so removing gluten is an excellent step because that's like, okay, we're going to stop causing damage. Like think if you're in a war zone, we're going to quit bombing that bridge over there. But if the bridge has already been bombed, then, it might still be falling apart. And so we want to also rebuild and put things back together. And so that's where the gut healing piece of things comes in. Some things that can be really nourishing for your gut are things like bone broth, collagen. I like to keep a good quality collagen powder. Those are things that are going to be really good for that gut lining. You can also just do things that are going to support the bacteria of your gut. So eating probiotic-rich foods, prebiotic-rich foods, lots of fibers that are going to help to nourish those good gut bacteria. There are certain herbs and supplements that can be supportive of gut healing, but that kind of stuff I always recommend working with a knowledgeable practitioner on, just because there's a lot of individuality when it comes to that as far as what may work for your body. But bone broth and collagen powder are definitely an excellent way to start. Okay, my friend, I just want you to remember here too, a couple of things. One, that healing is a long game, right? It's certainly not linear. It's never the way that we think it is, but consistency does matter in the long game here. Because at the end of the day, living with endometriosis, it's not a finite game that we're playing. It's an infinite game, meaning your goal is to just stay healthy each and every day. There's not like an end result where one day, okay, I'm done, I'm healthy, I'm good to go. It's a lifelong way of living. And that's why I really like to encourage you to make sustainable changes that you can live with, that feel good to your mind and body and spirit and all the things. And I'm here to support you. I also want to remind you that it's not all about the food. You may be listening to this episode if you haven't gone gluten-free before and thinking that, oh my gosh, going gluten-free is going to save my life. It's going to get rid of all this pain. It's going to get rid of all my symptoms. Gluten it's an important piece of the puzzle, but it's one factor. It's one piece of it. So I don't want you to think that, there's one thing that's going to solve all of your problems. For endo warriors, it's a complex condition that we have. And so there's a lot of factors. And I don't want to overwhelm you. That's not my point here. If you make that one positive change and it helps you, awesome. But I just don't want you to go into this thinking that, wow, this is the one thing that's going to solve all of my problems, because, I want to set you up for success at the end of the day. All right, my friend, I know that going gluten-free can feel a little overwhelming at first, but I promise that when you start feeling better, it will all be worth it. Now, if you're ready to get serious about healing your gut and managing your endo symptoms, I want you to check out the Endo Wellness Initiative, my membership program. And today, you can join for a discounted cost for your first month. I'm going to tell you all about it in just a second here. There's actually a whole section in there all about going gluten-free. Plus, I can offer you support in our community as you make that transition. If you need help finding recipes, if you need mental health support as you go along, if you're struggling with making changes like that, I'm happy to help you along the way. So, as a thank you for being a listener for the Endo Belly Girl podcast here, I have a limited time offer for you to join your first month of membership for 50% off. Woohoo! So head on over to endobellygirl.com/join, JOIN, and use coupon code PODCAST50. That's PODCAST 50, podcast 50. You're going to enter that code at checkout and you're going to get 50% off your first month in the membership. Oh my gosh, I can't wait to see you in there and support you along your endo journey here. You can find that link to join also in the show notes if you are driving and aren't able to write that down right at the present moment. I can't wait to see you in there, my friend. Much love. Have a wonderful day. Thank you so much for joining me today, my friend. If you loved what you heard, be sure to share with a friend and subscribe so that you can keep coming back for more. If you are ready to take the next step towards getting to the root cause of your endo symptoms like endobelly, pain, fatigue, and so much more, you need to download my free ultimate guide to building your own endometriosis diet. You can find the link in the show notes or at www.endobellygirl.com. Until next time, my friend.